All right, let me read you something. Let me read you something. Um, I was looking at Chris Lee has these translations,
Mhm.
and they're really cool translations. And I do some translation work from Arabic to English,
Oh,
uh,
oh, oh.
and so I kind of appreciate that website a lot. Um, but he's got a little interview, I think, with Kimura about Sagawa.
Oh,
He says just a part of that. He says Sensei said, "Come strike me." So I aimed at
oh,
his head and moved to strike. But just before the
right.
button struck, it seemed as if Sensei's body had suddenly disappeared, and he somehow
Ah,
appeared diagonally behind me with his sword overhead in a posture ready to cut me at any time.
hmm.
I couldn't understand at all how he could have moved like that. We did it several times, but although I watched him with eyes as large as saucers, I couldn't understand it. It was incredibly refined high sabaki.
Uh-huh.
So I'm kind of, like it's a cool thing. Like nobody who
Hmm.
does martial arts is going to read that and be like, whatever, that's not cool. I don't care what they say.
Hmm.
They're,
Hmm.
if I could do this, this would be amazing. Um,
Hmm.
and I think like before YouTube, like right now, you look at someone like Kur the Sensei, and you're like,
Mhm.
I don't know how that sword got from point A to point B. Like it's
Yep.
incredibly fast, right?
Mhm.
So you can sort of imagine that. So I'm not in any way dismissing any of it.
Okay.
And I've had at least one or two experiences that were like a little bit like that.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
actually kind of want to take the starting point of this conversation just because of the things we're going to talk about had
Mhm.
like how that statement there that I just read is really annoying. Like the older I get, the more I get really, really annoyed by descriptions like that, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
I'm like, this is cool. What is going on?
Mhm.
Right? And whatever produces like this kind of thing where I don't know what's going on. I'm 42 years
Mhm.
old. I have a 9 year old. We were just talking about him. Whatever gives me that feeling of I don't know what's going on, I find incredibly frustrating at this point. Like I'm just like, please just tell me because I would like to work hard and start to enjoy
Right.
it in some way. And so I guess the first place that I want to start is I want to talk a little bit about what this sort of thing in martial arts is.
Hmm.
Um, and so my first question really is, what is the difference? We're going to talk about aiki. And the
Hmm.
more that I look into it, the more I'm like, oh, there's something about this that's similar to, say, Taiji, which
Hmm.
a tiny little bit of, and had lots of conversations about and think I understand a bit better now. There's
Hmm.
something that's similar between that and aiki, but they're not exactly the same, it seems to me. It seems to me
Hmm.
that there are like differences, I don't know, of emphasis or of body mechanics or whatever. What are the differences that you've seen between those two things so that we can just broadly,
Hmm.
focus on what we're talking
And usually, I think when we're talking about aiki within Japanese martial arts, and by the way, I just want to say the first example you gave is completely explainable, very simply, and it actually links to why aiki works physically, and it also why that effect actually happens even when you're not in contact. It has to do with the brain and how it perceives movement.
about. Mm-hmm.
And when I say movement, I don't mean just visually. I also mean sensory, because we're sensitive to pressure and touch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so but putting that out of the way, typically within Japan, especially within the last 100 years, aiki is kind of like popped up. Uh, aiki is not something that was really widely discussed. I don't think until Takeda Sokaku popped up. Nor do I think is it something that he himself created or anything. And whether or not that stretches out back to the Takeda clan is, that's an area of contention.
Yeah.
And but usually when we talk about aiki, we're talking about daitoryu. And daitoryu, the martial art, and specifically where people get wrist grabbed and they're like all the way up like this, dancing up their toes, and the people feel this weird sensation where their balance is taken and they do things that are seem very odd to them, I guess, that they ordinarily would not do, nor would they think that they're being compliant in doing so. when we're talking about Chinese martial arts, a lot of the demos tend to go towards either rooting, explosive force, so no touch, boom, right? Either sending somebody back flying, which is, I mean, 50-50 on whether it's Tifang, where you're just uprooting the guy and sending them flying, or if it's actual Fajing, where bam, you actually send them flying. That's still being nice, because then energy is imparted to the person, the energy is lost as they're sent through the air. The not so nice version is you go bam, and the energy goes inside the person, they get dropped. That's dangerous, actually. But you have these explosive demos, so it's either power, control of the person sticking, I guess you could say. One could say that some of the sticking demos may overlap with the demos that are seen in aiki. Ueshiba was certainly known for touching people, getting them to stick. Again, that's a phenomenon that's actually easily explained. In fact, I will say right now to anybody watching this, go and watch Okamoto Makoto's videos, his channel. That guy is, I'm in Japan, I want to meet this guy. Yeah. He explains everything succinctly. I was able to go through all of his demos, I guess you could say. He's got like a Q level demo where he explains everything. If you have body connection, you understand center line, center of gravity, all these concepts, you can actually go through them step by step. It was like, oh, that's cool. I hadn't thought of it. Yeah, that is how that works. And it's just very logical, up to the point of even like why people stick to you. It's very logical, actually. So to answer your question, usually aiki is enwrapped within that container of sticking, getting people to stick to you, getting people to do all these like funky things that are usually within the context of wrist grabs, joint locks, within a daitoru context. Internal Chinese martial arts are usually explosive force, weird kind of repulsion, sticking, that kind of thing, which they talk about using either qi or jin. And usually they emphasize control by the tanden, dantian, hara, however you want to term it. Usually in Japanese martial arts, they talk about the hara, but not specifically to the degree of control that is usually talked about in the various Chinese internal martial arts, whether we're talking northern, southern, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so it's interesting because as I'm listening to you, I'm actually hearing a lot of the stuff that you're saying that's involved with this kind of internal movement, internal strength. The things that I've seen from ARC are, I mean, just on YouTube. I'm not his student, I'm not your student. I don't know what you guys were doing, but involve kind of explosive movement out that you'd be describing from the kind of more Chinese paradigm.
Yes.
And so let's talk about what sort of ARC's idea, or the kind of like how he uses the body. What are the sort of internal power things that he does, each one individually, and then how he kind of relates them to each other. Like, what would internal power be according to ARC?
Well, first off, he doesn't actually use internal power. In fact, I go so far as to draw this distinction between internal skill versus internal power. Power is power. So when we say power, you're talking about additives. You're talking about breath pressure. You're talking about compression. You're talking about all sorts of other things. Okay. When you're talking about internal skill, you're talking about grabbing somebody's balance, disrupting their balance, the ability to actually grab their chest center of gravity, their stomach, sometimes their knees and their ankles from some very good people. And especially if there's a skill gap. I mean, I can certainly do that. I can grab somebody's chest center of gravity or stomach center of gravity and do like cool and funky things to them, depending on how big of a gap there is between us and skill level. And let me just define that by saying, as if somebody is very well conditioned in, say, BJJ, I probably wouldn't be able to do that because they're strong from a structural point of view, tissue point of view, tendon point of view. So it's much harder to do it, on some people. And then others, it's very easy. So somebody like Bjorn, no way. There's a weight difference. There's a mass or there's a weight mass difference. There's a conditioning difference. So I wouldn't be able to do it. Somebody else lightweight, yeah, I can do it. But going back to the power thing, ARC does use power additives. I think from the get-go, he's seen, say, like the power additives that you see the Chens do. The Chen style is very famous for their, for their whole body shaking stuff. And I happen to like Mike Sigmund's general model, where you imagine the entire body like a Michelin man, like a suit, and you want to access as much elasticity across the body as possible in order to create this elastic force. And a large part of that is going to be centered in your core, or the tanden area. And kind of like an octopus, you can through breath pressure and other augmentation, you can basically stretch and manipulate that elastic tissue to create great amounts of force, which is great when you're shaking a spear, when in terms of explosive grappling and all that kind of thing, that's great. But Ark, I guess, never really liked that model, because he was like, that assumes a person with a larger frame. And he was a very small person. So, and I watched him develop over the years. He didn't have what you see him do now, especially on the Shioda channel. He did not have 20 years ago when I first met him. He is a work in progress. So I've been lucky in that I've been watching him. He went from saying Dantian doesn't matter at the first Seattle seminar. He's like, Chinese always say Tanyan, Dantian. And Dantian doesn't matter, right? And he was like, you need to worry about your chest center, your chest, the chest cross, etc. Which I agree, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's like, oh, you have to worry about the tanden. It's like, okay, because now he's focused more on that. So it's like a stage of development. Mm-hmm. And he used to kind of make fun of, I guess you could say, explosive type stuff, but recently he's been getting into that because he can do it. But caveat, not in the same way that to Chen's. He does not use the same kind of elastic storage, mainly because he watches it. And I see him playing around with his own version of it, which I've also kind of chided him on. It's like, it's one thing to do it based off of your own, I guess, imagination, which he's a very astute observer, but it's still one thing to do it based off of your own observations versus meet an expert, get hands-on, feel their dantian moving, doing all the storage stuff. But
So the things that you would say, I was listening to an interview with Leo Tamaki, and he was saying that what he was very impressed by with Ark is this ability, for example, to absorb a huge amount of power coming from someone, whether that's or a strike, and then to sort of to emit a huge amount of power. And so personally, when I've seen things, there's a couple of things that I find really interesting that we can get into a bit later. But you also then mentioned, the ability to control somebody else's body, to be able to access specific bits of their body. I suppose you mean by touching or by controlling other parts of their body, like grabbing their wrists or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of a specific skill. And then the ability to take someone's balance, right? Would you say those are the main things that that Ark would be exceptional at, or that the Aunkai method does really well?
Yes, because it has to start from. He's even said, like, so from the very beginning, it's about stabilizing what he calls the upper cross and the axis and all this, and that means stabilizing your own center axis. Because otherwise, how are you supposed to control yourself? If you can't control yourself, how are you going to control another?
Okay, so that brings us. So let's take those things, right? Absorption, hitting, balance taking, and sort of control. Mm-hmm. We'll get into some more details about what you're doing to somebody else in a second. But right now, I think one of the things that everybody from Aunkai has been consistently saying is this kind of emphasis on this kind of Budo body, or like this bujutsu body, right? what does that mean? Like you're talking, I mean, my own background is a little bit of Chinese martial arts. That's how it started. And then I moved to jiu-jitsu, to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? Um, Having this conversation with somebody who's doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, who has never, for example, done any shingi, which I've done a little bit of, or bagua, and like, I mean, maybe like 2 years of each of those, and then maybe a year of taiji. There are some things that I think I kind of understand about what you're saying, but pretend I've done nothing but jiu-jitsu.
Hmm.
What does changing your body in that way mean? What does conditioning mean? How do you change your body? What does that mean?
Okay, it's pretty simple actually. When you tussle with a white belt, and a white belt who's not done judo, has not done wrestling, like an actual white belt.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on, stop. Just fix this camera. So, uh, they feel different versus a black belt who's been rolling for a number of years, and everybody says Hickson feels different. Well, of course. And we all know Hickson didn't do just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We know that he did gymnastica natural, a whole bunch of breathing, a whole bunch of, different kind of tissue conditioning. And that changed the composition of his body. Like all these Eastern arts, whether it's yoga, whether it's Shaolin, whether it's Tai Chi, I don't care what it is, they are calisthenic exercises designed to literally change the composition of your body. And to the touch, when your fascia becomes stronger, when your tendons become stronger, and your ligaments kind of change, I'm sure there's some kind of neuromuscular or neurofascial, whatever connection that changes that causes this to feel different on touch. But like when you touch Ark, you feel his conditioning. It's like, the hell? It's like, how does somebody even train to become like this? When you touch him, you'll know it. Now, likewise, when I touch Bjorn on the ground, he feels completely different from the average, I would say, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy that I meet over here in Japan, who maybe has more of a sports emphasis. Although they will feel, to my mind, connected to some degree. Like everybody that does sports combat, I don't care if you do MMA, I don't care if you do wrestling, you will have that connected body feel. They feel heavy. They feel more solid than the average person. And that's not something that you can get by just going to the gym. So backing up to what do we mean by bujutsu body? First off, I hate the term. It's just because when we say bujutsu, in Chinese, we would say wushu. But if you say wushu, then you have the connotation of gymnastics and performance art, which we know that's not what we're talking about. So when we say bujutsu, we have to take into account the Japanese cultural context of these old martial arts and the body, that conditioned body that was needed in order to pull off all these really cool moves, whether it's sword, whether it's joint locks, and so on and so forth, in a very specific manner. So from a Brazilian, yeah.
How does that, you started saying this already, but I found that kind of interesting. How does that feel to you from the outside? Like you, for example, touching Ark?
Oh,
How does it feel to you as you learned from Ark, for example?
okay. Well, how does Ark feel to me 20 years ago versus now is also a very entirely different question. Yeah. And when I first met him, I felt he was connected, and I had a sense for what is connected via Sam Chin from Ili Chen. Sam was massively connected, but he's also a massive guy, still is. But I didn't think Ark was as good as him because I didn't feel as much, I guess, like tissue conditioning in a way, like compared to Sam, but I probably wasn't taking into account the mass. Now when I touch him, he's taking out almost all the slack out of his body. So when you touch him, it's like Jesus. It's like, if you think of it like a rope, if the rope has too much slack in it, when you touch a person, like the rope can feel soft, but if it's always taut, this taut rope can feel soft, but at certain angles or depending on what context he's in, it'll feel like it's not that it's stiff, but it's like you can't push against it. You're not pulling against it. It just feels incredibly dense, basically. And then you literally feel his bones move underneath all that, basically. It's a really odd sensation, actually.
Interesting. I think that's the first time that I've heard that description, which is kind of cool. Okay, so then let's just take that thought, because I know these things are really difficult to explain. I had one experience with my first jiu-jitsu coach that I still it's like 5 years into like training jiu-jitsu when I can, and I'm like, I don't really understand the things that guy did. I mean, at this point, he's like a fifth degree black belt or something. He's trained with everything. But the internally to you, as your body changed over, how long has it been? It's been like 20 years or something?
20 years, yeah.
How long, how does that feel internally? Because I've heard that term before. You've taken the slack out your body, and this is the first time that I've gotten anything resembling a concrete description of that. How does that feel internally to you then?
It becomes lighter and looser in a way. No, lighter and looser. Yeah, in some ways lighter and looser. To me, to people I touch, they're like, I feel denser. So there is a very big discrepancy between what I feel versus what the other person who's touching me feels.
When you say lighter and looser, you mean that there's more you feel that there's more mobility in your joints? Is that what you mean?
The tissue, mobility, ease of movement, control, et cetera, et cetera. Caveat, somebody said that out of the three, there's another, so Manabu is also Hanshi, same as me. Manabu actually feels denser than me. And I used to have a much denser feel to me, but because I started messing around with my alignment and my center of gravity to make my legs lighter, because that's one of the things that Art emphasized. Like I can get my body to feel incredibly light on touch. I can also make it feel dense. It just depends on how I screw with my alignment in terms of like when I'm joined with my opponent.
When you say screw with your alignment, what do you like?
Well, it means literally like how I jump chin, how I just, my ears, the bottom of my feet, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. So your, hips and shoulders, knees and toes, elbows and
let's simplify it, because if you go on adjusting too many things, it becomes a very complicated affair. And we know that these things need to stay simple. What Ark is known for is that he adjusts his posture literally from his chin and the back of his neck. And that, because the head is the heaviest thing. And since the head is the top of the chain to the spine, although, yes, you want to adjust from the bottom of the feet because it's the base of the pyramid, in actuality, like if you watch even Kuroda, he juts his chin forwards before he opens his sword, because if you jut the chin forwards, that changes the clavicle, which drops the chest, which actually and partially opens the chest, which means you've already drawn your sword. You've already done the sword draw. So you can, instead of operating from your dantian, you can start the chain, the movement chain from your chin or your neck, actually.
Okay, and something about that changes internally which parts of your body are more mobile, right? Like increases the mobility because of just how you're arranging your body internally.
Yes.
And then the person who's feeling you from the outside, it changes how kind of compact your body feels, or how each part of your body seems to be connected to each other part of your body.
Sure. So for instance, you were talking about absorption. Absorption is actually very easy to describe and even show. What took me like years to figure out, I can show in like literally 30 seconds. So if somebody this is a demo I usually give in seminars. It's like, if somebody pushes on a stick, I showed this in the Shioda video. Somebody pushes on a stick, and if you push back, that's going to go to your back and to your back foot, right? But if you push your palm underneath like this, and you keep your forehead back and your chin back, you don't move your body forward. You only bring your elbow underneath. You're going to get a stretch that comes to your anterior chain or the front side. Yeah. As soon as that stretch hits your front side, you're actually creating a pull. What looks like me pushing is not a push, it's actually a pull, which means even though this bar is here, I'm pulling it. And because of that, the person pushing, there's actually a force being pulled out this way that cancels out their push. So to them, it feels like they're just pushing on, I don't know, something that's absorbing them.
So I've heard you say that before, and it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I definitely just instinctively, because I've just done a lot of moving with things, right? Understand that shoving with this,
yes,
having this thing,
yes,
in my own body,
yes,
completely different things. Yes. And I'm not sure if this is true, but it seems like this is sort of, okay, shoulders, back maybe, right? Yes. This, something is happening which I don't understand, that goes kind of here, and then chest does something funny, and then my diaphragm almost does something funny, and my belly, and then my hip, and then right? I have no idea what the hell that is, but it is different. Those are two different things. Now, you described it as pulling.
Yeah.
But I think for a person who hasn't been messing around with this for 20 years, anything where your hand is moving forward and the other person is going backward is pushing.
Yep.
And the more I think about what you say and the more I pay attention to my body, the less I understand what's going on. Because it has, over the past couple of days, become weirdly messed up in my head, because I'm like, this does feel like a tugging sensation on the front of my body. And it's almost like the sensation that you would have if you pulled my arm out.
Yes.
Like, I get that same set of physical tensions.
Yeah.
So what do you mean a pull? Like, how is that a pull?
You described it. It's just because it feels like there's a pulling, like a pulling sensation, that this is being pulled out like this, right? Now, by the way, you don't actually do the pull from here, although you can, and that's actually why you get into the sword rep and the tenochi. Again, go see Okamoto Makoto. He explains this much better than I do. Right down to the fascial tensioning and why it works. You have one point of contact, multiple force vectors manifesting. So whether you do that through muscle or through what he calls the white tissue, which would be fascia, tendons, and ligaments, you're going to cause the brain to go derp, basically. You know, there's actually an easy way to test this. So my friend Alex, what he used to do is like, okay, so if you put your hand to my chest like this and you push on, it's really hard for me to walk forwards. But if I lock your hand in place and I pull you really hard to me, then try and walk forwards, it's super easy. And to them, it feels like, oh, their force got absorbed or something. It just feels odd. It's like, well, why can't I suddenly hold you down? Well, because, you know, you have more than one force acting. If they're pushing forwards, you're pushing back with a normal force, but then you also add this cancellation vector here. And then Okamoto Makoto will give it another. This one was great. Oh, God. Don't zoom in. Okay. It's too high tech for me. I need to figure out how to overcome this, the high tech. Anyway, so you have a partner, they're pushing on your hand like this. Now imagine the partner is still here pushing on my hand, and I take my finger and I simply push on the back of their palm like this. So I have one vector, two vector. Then I add my head and I go three vector, and they'll go down. That's one point of contact, multiple vectors. And this theme pops up multiple times. And when you start activating like this kind of like, so the front, what I was alluding to was you don't throw it through here, you can do it through the chin. If you bring the chin forwards, your collarbone drops, comes down to the chest. Now you've created this adjustment downwards, where you literally move your anterior chain of the body downwards, and that's a vector going down, not forwards, not back, not here, not there, down.
Mm.
And that, I think, is also responsible. So it's a bunch of things. Part of it is the tissue stretching that's going to take up some of the slack and the force that they feel. There's also a vector that's going downwards, right? And then combined with alignment tricks and other things, that you create the sensation that you're pushing on the person, but it's not affecting them, but it doesn't feel like they're pushing back with any kind of force. It just feels like you're dumping all your force into like this black hole, basically.
I'm actually really glad that we're having this conversation now. So, because it's a really interesting thing, right? It's a little frustrating if you go online, or even if you have a friend who has, trained something like this, and you're trying to explain something to somebody, there's all this miscommunication that happens. I think this is one of the reasons why this happens. It's because that's a very complex, compound, like, set of things that you just said, right?
Mm-hmm.
That stretch will have to do with one layer of it, which is you're physically, literally conditioning your body to be expansive a certain way. It gives.
Mm-hmm.
There's a give,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But that give is also related to what the person it then feels as they push into you, right?
Right.
But then you've introduced all these other vectors where you're just you're confusing their brain about this is me testing if I understand what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's one vector coming this way.
Right.
I instinctively know what to do.
Yes.
It comes
Correct.
this way, and so I instinctively go this way.
Yes. Yes.
If that's moving at multiple planes, I don't know which of those things to respond to, even if I know that they're all happening, which actually most of the time you wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't know that they're all happening because you're used to like that kind of interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In your body, you have this sense of you have to train all of those things that will produce that in another person, like that response or lack of response, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The first time that was done to you, by Ark or by anybody else, how did it feel to you?
It just feels odd. Like your brain just doesn't know. This is why you feel like if they use the ground as a solid support, you're going to feel the ground, so to speak, right? And you'll feel this unstoppable force, but you don't actually understand, like, I guess, like the brain's role and why this is working, so to speak, like the interpretation of the data that's coming in.
I'm going to jump in with a small story. The first time, because I think I know exactly what you mean, and I think a lot of people are not going to know exactly what you mean, even though they should, because they're mostly going to be jiu-jitsu people. The first time I ever had jiu-jitsu done to me, I now understand, if I remember correctly, and it doesn't matter what the technique was, but I now understand, let's say, that it was a scissor sweep. And so I know exactly what a scissor sweep is. And so at half the time, I'm like, oh, crap, I'm about to fall on this part of my body and I'm going to land on this part of my hip because this person's leg is in this part. I feel the sensation on this part of my torso just under my floating rib and I really don't like it. How do I stop this? What do I do? And then it's either too late or it isn't, right?
Right.
But the first time that was ever done to me, here's how it felt. A friend of mine who I'd known for decades and who I lived with was underneath me. I outweigh him.
Right.
And I'm leaning over him.
Yeah.
And my weight is on him, and that by every rational understanding, and I'm giving you the sense like as it was viscerally to me, right? By every rational understanding, this person now is in very serious trouble. And I was facing the ceiling. And in between, there was a sensation of movement, but I didn't understand, when I've thought about it since, I didn't understand where the beginning of that movement was. How can I move this way?
Yeah.
Like, where was he rooting himself to produce a vector going in that direction?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't paying attention to my own body, and so I'm like, but I didn't feel anything as I went over.
Yeah.
Right? Now I know, but that first, my first jiu-jitsu coach, he didn't roll with white belts, which is why he's never had an injury in his entire career. He competes all the time.
He's smart.
Yeah. No, he's never rolled with, but like, as I was like moving up, like, like he looked at me and I guess I was getting less and less spazzy, and he was like, I want you to see something, I think is what he's thinking. So he's like, come here. So he started rolling with me, and basically we slapped hands, and then he turtled up. And I just reached forward, and all I wanted to do was I wanted to reach forward, and I just wanted to like throw my leg over him, right? And just back control, right?
Yeah.
And now I've been training for almost 2 years, right? And I found myself on the floor, and not with a shock either. Like, I just kind of found myself sliding across the floor on my back, and I get up, and I like kind of go at him again, and he looks up at me, and he's got this really cheeky smile on his face. And when we were done, I'd rolled with his like brown belts and with like at least one of his black belts. And I said to him, you're like more annoying than your like black belts, because his black belt's a lot of pressure, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, but less force, I hope. And I said, yes. I still don't know what he was doing. And so I wanted to throw that in there so that when people are listening to us, it's not like it's a thing that sounds big and mysterious, right? And it's a very skillful thing.
Yeah.
But I kind of like to throw people's minds back to when they first experienced something that they didn't understand, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it feels, when it first happened to you, who was the person who you first experienced it with?
Was it Sam? It was Sam. Sam was the first guy that. Well, no, it wasn't Sam. It was his longtime student Dave, Pandula. So he's a fireman he's a career fireman, which meant he had all the time in the world to train, and that's all he did. He was very, very good, very connected.
Yeah.
And I met him first. He was the guy. He touched me, and he just controlled my balance, and I was just like, "The hell is this?" And then I met Sam. And I was like, then I feel like massive amounts of like the floor, basically, and solid but soft in a way, but just like a tidal wave of force.
Now, what is the difference between somebody controlling your balance in that way that you're talking about now? Somebody controlling your balance, say, in judo, or in
It isn't technically, if they're really good. If you get to the Mifune level, and you've seen videos of Mifune,
I have. It's beautiful.
It isn't. Yeah, it was beautiful because there's an overlap there. The Chinese talk about zongdi, or central. The Chinese is that? Well, I know in Chen Tai Chi they talk about zongdi, or central equilibrium, and central equilibrium not only applies technically to yourself, but when you touch somebody, basically. So when you touch, so you have a central equilibrium, a center of mass, basically where you balance, right? And that, kind of jumping ahead, but there's a point where if you get the alignment correct, you don't feel stable, you feel kind of wobbly. If you think about it, if you're in perfect balance, you're not stable. You're wobbly. Like if you balance a stick perfectly, it's wobbly, right? Now you can make as your brain gets used to it, it doesn't feel super wobbly and you get over that sensation. But in Japanese, we say hendetatsu, or stand on the point. So let's say we have the central equilibrium, right? Now, if you touch somebody, you grab them with one hand and two hands, now you are a conjoined unit, right? If you can unite your two centers of mass or feel where that is and manipulate your body in such a manner that you control their center of mass, then this means that if you tip yourself to the side, they will tip with you. You don't need any force at all. If, however, you tip your head like this, and if you just tip your head to the side, it'll cause your body to come, fall one side or the other. If they don't follow you, that means you're not joined. You haven't grabbed their center of mass. So when you see somebody that is very good in jujitsu or judo, they understand this concept. I'm not sure if they think about it intellectually like this, but there's certainly it's just a principle. It's just physics.
Yeah. Well, I think the assumption that we're both making is that it's just physics. It's just which part of physics, right? So this is this is really interesting. So you're saying that as soon as you hold on to something,
yes,
you're standing on that one point, right?
Yes.
They are standing on that one point. I mean, they may not be because their balance might not be particularly good, but in theory, you could be standing on that one point, right? They have a balance or imbalance of some sort. Are you saying when you're holding on to them, let's just imagine that that's become one body, right? Like one structure, right? You're finding that one point that both of you are sharing?
Oh yeah, yes, but let's back up for a minute. And I'm going to be very upfront. This is not my model. I literally stole this from YouTube from Okamoto Makoto because it's brilliant. Okay, so if you're both standing, you turn yourself into a four-legged animal or four-legged chair, right? Sigmund's even said this. Now, what's interesting, what I thought is Okamoto pointed out that if you stand on the point, in this case, he's saying the tailbone, and that's why I use as one of my dirty hacks to feel your center line. You put a stick at the nape of your neck while sitting on your tailbone on the ground, and that way you get this precarious balance feeling. Then you just rehash that while you're standing, and you get it. But usually, if two people are standing on their 2 feet and they grab each other, then you're basically on two stilts, right? So you're a four-legged chair. However, if one person is standing on one point, in this case, the tailbone, let's say, they're balancing towards their tailbone, which makes them slightly precarious, you've turned the whole system into a tripod. That means that the other person is standing on two stilts, balancing onto that one point that you've manifested, allowing you, therefore, to take control of the entire physical system.
It's like taking that four-legged chair and putting it on one of its legs.
Yeah.
And then the chair also becomes really light then.
Yeah. Yep. Why do you think when Mifune throws somebody, it looks like really light? Now, that dude was strong. I don't know if you've seen, maybe we can post in a picture of his back when he was younger. That dude was conditioned. So I'm going to be real talk here. You still have to be strong. You still have to be conditioned. You cannot wave your arms around and think because you understand the principles, you're going to be able to do that. Can you do it under set conditions? Yes. Under duress, that's another. Then this is where conditioning skill practice come into play.
Can you do it when you say can you do it kind of in isolation? Are you saying you need less strength in that situation?
No, because it's under test conditions, right? So we have a study called push-up, where somebody you're just standing on 2 feet and somebody resists your push, right? And so as you extend your arms this way, right? And there's multiple ways to solve this problem, but how do you extend your arms such that Newton's third law seemingly does not apply? It does apply, okay? But we're negating it in a way, right? So one way to negate it is to bring your forehead back, your chin back this way. This is actually going to cause, you might feel a downwards force go this way, and then your arms basically come out this way as a counterweight, which means now the person is balanced on you and they move away from it because you've conjoined. You've basically created that you've gone from the four-legged model to the three-legged model, whereby they're leaning on you, and then now it's really easy to just move them away. But to them, they're like, What the hell? That's so odd.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's a beautiful description, no matter who came up with it. So thank you for bringing it to our attention. Right. Um, I think that's also a good point to then say, okay, what are the solo exercises? And there's going to be a lot of them, and like it's and we also don't want to like take up your whole life, right? So, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at an example of a solo exercise, a partner exercise, and if you could just walk us through the basics of, okay, here's a solo exercise. Here it is in its basic form. Here it is when it's a bit more advanced. Here it is. But what we're aiming for is to get your body conditioned in this way and to get you to understand these things. And then when you go to the double, so that people, I think, have a sense of like, okay, but what are you talking? Like, how does this get done? You know what I mean?